All right, welcome, Shabbat Shalom. Welcome to the after class discussion on perhaps the greatest, or we could say the most important, or we could say the most significant, or we could say any number of things about the Holiness Code and the passage or the partial passage within that Holiness Code. I think it really is as people in the ancient world believed. I really think that it is that important to think about what that means. And so I kind of want to talk not just about that verse. Obviously, anything that we covered today in the class is open for discussion. We can discuss the idea that Leviticus 19 is a version of the 10 words, or a possible version of the 10 words, or what that might mean, or you're welcome to challenge those ideas. Maybe you have a different view of those things. But that's what this is about. So who among all these talented people, Bible students for all these years, has something to add? James has jumped up first. So James, you're welcome to turn your camera on if you wish, or you can just be audio. That's fine.
I'm going to go for audio today, Ross.
Okay, James. All right. Good, good. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing well. Doing well. Yeah, what popped out, and just it's sort of one of those things you remember from when you're younger. I remember my grandfather talking about gleaning, and you would think that that's maybe still just an ancient practice, but I know I was probably in my teens when I recall him saying this. So we're talking about, the 1960s. My grandfather was a farmer for much of his life, and he knew other farmers, and he talked about, I don't really know if this was a corn harvest, probably was, but going out with bushel baskets and gleaning in a field of a farmer that had just run his harvesting machinery through the field. And the way that worked out was you could keep it if you wanted to, or sell it back to the farmer. He paid you for it, whatever the going rate was for corn in a bushel.
Right.
But it was sort of an example of that gleaning. In other words, if he had his own animals to keep and needed some, corn feed for that, he could have kept it and gone home and been able to feed his own critters. So that's just one thing that popped out at me, that and I think of that every time I read that passage about the gleaning, because
Leave the corners. You're talking about where you leave the corners.
yes, leave the corners. Yep.
Yep.
So, it's a practice that at least possibly still exists in certain parts of our agricultural society. So we'll see.
Yep. Yeah, I think it's the lesson, and I'm not trying to overinterpret here, but I think there are ways that we can think about how do we fulfill these. I gave the example of when I worked in industry and I had several employees, and the way I thought about it, I couldn't give them their money every day because the company actually paid them, but I could make sure I touched their time card. How made sure that I wrote down, when they worked overtime, and that way they got the money that was owed to them. So how do we interpret, or how do we put the principle to work on some of these things? Like you mentioned, your grandfather as a farmer, he would leave certain, I guess, the edges of his field, or he would go into someone else's field that did that. So how do we think about that? I guess one of the things I think about is what could we do in a non-agricultural way that would get the same principle. The principle is help those who need the help. I mean, right? Wouldn't that be the thing?
Well, I know people that have had, they plant a large garden, but after canning all the tomatoes you can possibly store, you start giving it away
Yeah.
to other people. I mean, that's a common practice, especially with people with the larger gardens. The comment you made about the time cards brought something to mind as well. Early in my employed life, I had a job at a car dealership.
Yeah.
And what was interesting there was this dealer, the owner of the dealership, paid you in cash every payday. You got a slip with all the withholdings and all that and what you earned, but you did not get a check. You got a pay packet with everything counted out to the last penny.
Oh, really?
Yep. One of the jobs I had there was to go to the bank on Friday midday and pick up all the cash because their accountant knew what all the employees were going to get. So she knew how many ones and fives and tens and 20s or whatever everybody needed and all the change.
Huh.
So I would bring back a bag of cash to the office so they could prepare the pay packets.
Interesting.
Yep. That was different.
Good deal. That's good. Hey, thanks, James. I appreciate you. Have a great Sabbath. Stick around. You may have other questions or comments.
Oh, I will. Thanks.
All right. Hey, Claudie, how are you? I see you with your hand up there. Good morning.
Hi.
Good morning.
Good morning. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Can I say that this was my favorite class of all that I've seen?
Really?
No. Yeah, it made a new classification.
Okay.
This was my favorite. And as I was reading this parsha to my mother earlier in this morning, I was looking at the same things that you pointed out.
Ah.
And that's why I say that the Spirit of God works in waves.
Yeah.
It's really marvelous. I don't know, it's a miracle. God makes wonders.
Give me an example. Yeah, go ahead.
I was reading to my mother as I started, and the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto all the congregation of the children of Israel, say unto them, You shall be holy, for I, the Lord, am holy. You shall fear every man his mother and his father. Mom, this is one of the second commandments. This is the second commandment. You remember? And then turn you not unto idols. You remember this is the first commandment. So I through the verses I was seeing that. And another thing that I think has to do, first of all, I think that I commented. I think that this chapter 19 of Leviticus is something like a second witness of the leather strips that Shapira brought.
Yeah.
It's very important, and that's why I love this class. This is grand. This is really big. We ought to know this.
I love Leviticus 19 already.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. I mean, for me, it's the same. I feel the same excitement. So
exactly. Yeah. And another thing, as you were talking about who is your neighbor, I wanted to share something really, really briefly.
Sure.
As I was starting to seek God in this new way, as in being honest to myself and seeking only the truth and nothing but the truth, I started to not consider many of the people neighbors. And that was something that I think I did wrong, because I didn't rebuke or correct my friends, as Leviticus 17 says, and things started boiling inside me, and I started losing them.
Started losing your friends, you mean?
My friends, I mean. While I didn't do that with all of them, because at least I have two classical Christian friends that I didn't consider them strangers. And I started to show them my way of believing and seeking God. And they did, they initially considered me something weird. That's a weird way of believing in God and of seeking God. But even if they did that, they started understand the logic behind the Decalogue faith.
Yeah.
And what I wanted to really reread again is 17 and 18 by Leviticus 19, I mean. Thou shalt not hate thy brother in thine heart. This is the King James Bible.
Gotcha.
Thou shalt in any wise rebuke thy neighbor and not suffer sin upon him. Thou shalt not avenge nor bear any grudge against the children of thy people, but thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. I am the Lord.
Yeah.
What I wanted to give accent is if we feel something against our brother, we should tell them. This is something like an advice for being open-hearted
Yeah.
with each other, so that sometimes when we don't like something or we don't agree, we have to tell them, because if we don't tell them, we will start and have it inside of ourselves, and if we don't let that steam out,
Yes.
then the explosion will come.
That's true, and it's in all relationships. I think this is something that it is a good lesson, and we can connect it to your very thoughts on Leviticus 19.
Mm.
Particularly, I want someone to tell me when they have a difference of opinion, or I would rather someone tell me if they have a problem with me, as we say, or maybe they're upset, or maybe I said something inadvertently, probably, that would hurt someone's feelings or cause them to stumble. I would rather them tell me than assume that I know the problem. And we see this in relationships, men and women, boys and girls, boys and friends. Like sometimes we just, well, you should have known that upset me. Well, let's not assume that our friends or our boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, that they pick up on these things. It's better to be honest and let people know, hey, when you do that, it really, really hurts my feelings.
Bothers.
Could you, yeah, or it bothers me or whatever. So that's good advice. I mean, whether a person believes that this is divine or whether it's good advice at the minimal,
Exactly.
Yeah.
I finished. Thank you very much for this class. It was a big blessing. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'm glad you got to talk with your mom today, and you had a good discussion on that. Tell Arta I said hello as well if she's not with us. So.
I will.
All right.
I will.
Okay. Yeah. Hey, Betty, how are you?
I'm good. It's a beautiful day here in Lake Charles. I'm sure it's pretty there too.
It is.
Shiny sunshine and breezy. Just a wonderful blessing on this Shabbat.
Yes.
I wanted to say amen to what Clody was saying, because I was thinking the same thing as I was reading Kedoshim and honed in on the same chapter that you taught. So I guess we have like minds in that sense. But it made me think of a couple of things. One is, if you read Micah 6:8, well, we don't, Hashem doesn't ask for burnt sacrifices. What he wants, what he requires, is to do justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with our God. And if you think about doing justly, that's how we treat other people, how we treat our brother, how we treat our neighbor.
Yeah.
And loving mercy, that's the same thing. And then walking humbly. It's just obedience to God. And to me, that is the holiness code right there.
Yeah.
In Micah 6:8. That's my opinion. But I've always loved that verse. And on another vein, and this may be too far out, just something I'm thinking of. I know other cultures have many of these same things in their history, and there are many other writings, not just in Torah. It makes me wonder that, when Hashem created us and breathed the breath of life into us, which I believe individually we all have that, his breath and the life that comes from him. Do you think that possibly these things could have been breathed into us, because, like, encoded, because they're a part of him? and that through the ages we have forgotten. And um, so we just need to remember the way that he wanted us to live from the very beginning, to be holy.
Yeah.
You know, is that way too far out?
No, I don't think so. I think whenever we understand the idea of biblical holiness and what's being asked, and I'm not so concerned with the ritualistic side of this equation right now, but in terms of the ethical side, in terms of whether you look at the negative side or the positive side of this golden rule, as we say, whether you think of it as love your neighbor as yourself or whatever is hateful to you, don't do to your neighbor, either one of those is perfectly fine. But if we think in terms of what can I do to make this world a better place? What can I do? How can I live my life so that it's conducive to a holiness? I think that would fix the world, really. Tikkun olam is a beautiful concept within Judaism, but I think a lot of times it starts with each of us individually. I'm reminded of a story. I almost remember the name of the book. Maybe I will in a few minutes. But I think the title might be, or the concept certainly is here, There's No Messiah and You're It. And it's the story of a rabbi in an inner city area. He had a Passover Seder every year, invited people from all over, Christians, Jews, white, black, it didn't matter. Everybody in the town would come. And he says the most impactful Passover that he ever had was when a young black girl, about 11 years old, sat beside him at the Passover Seder. And he said that she looked down and saw the empty chair for Elijah. And she didn't know what it was. She said, "Whose chair is that?" And he said, "Well, that's for Elijah in our tradition." And she said, "Well, what does that mean?" And he said, "Well, you're a Christian. I know you know about John the Baptist, right?" And she said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, Elijah, John the Baptist is supposed to be like doing the job of Elijah." And so she asked him another question. I mean, this is at the Seder. I mean, they're supposed to be doing the Seder. And she said, "I need to ask you, what's he going to do?" She said, "What?" He said, "Well, he's going to fix the world. He's going to fix the world, like he's going to teach children to turn to their parents and parents to their children." And she looked at him and he said the most powerful question that has ever been asked of him as a rabbi. She said, "Why do we have to wait on Elijah for that?" And when you think about it, I think a lot of times we take the problems of our world and we shove them to heaven, and we expect that God or the Messiah or some eschatological event has to come before we start working on our world. I truly believe that if we could embrace love God, love your neighbor, and somehow begin to act like we believe that, I think we could fix, as the old saying goes, might not be able to fix the world, but by goodness, you can fix somebody's world. And I think that's what we have to think like. So,
Yes,
yeah.
I agree. I love that. And if you remember, some of you were there at the conference when I spoke, and I had this little gift box.
Yep.
And it's like, that's Hashem's gift to us, is who we are and what we can do. And, Hashem gave us life, and what we do with it is our gift back to him.
Yep.
It's just saying, hallelujah, thank you. Let me try to make somebody's world better. Let me smile and make somebody happy. Give my smile to someone else and do an act of chesed, of tzedakah, loving
Yep.
kindness. To me, that's what the world's all about. And to me, that's what you were saying. And I think that's the whole crux of everything, of the whole Torah.
Good thoughts. I appreciate you, Betty.
You are welcome. I appreciate you. Thank you.
Hey, Karen, you're up. How are you today?
Good. So I want to talk about first the gleaning thing.
Okay.
I'm I'm a big believer in voluntary welfare.
Okay.
I
Define it. Help us understand that we
Uh-huh.
know what you mean there.
I love GoFundMe, that outfit GoFundMe.
Yep.
To me, voluntary welfare. That's, somebody needs help with their child who's in the hospital. Somebody
Yep.
needs help burying their spouse. Somebody needs help with this or that. And usually it's your neighbor. It's somebody you know or somebody you know that knows someone.
Yeah.
And that's to me voluntary welfare. That's something I can contribute to. That's me helping my neighbor.
Love it.
And then we used to belong to a gleaners group, my husband and I, and we would pick people's apples trees that they weren't going to pick. And the organization would, get donations from stores, things that were, or farmers, things that were not market ready. And, put the post up, hey, we're going to do a handout, and everyone line their cars up and come get your produce or whatever it was. And, that's communities working together.
Yeah.
I'm not a huge fan of forced welfare, I'm going to be honest.
Okay. Yep.
It's, being forced to support people in ways I don't necessarily agree with, people I don't know that are not my neighbors.
Right.
And I'm just going to leave that there. But, I am a big fan of helping your neighbor and what I call voluntary welfare.
I too, by the way, I too like those when we know about a cause and we know that there are people who need help. It is, and it helps us to narrow it down because, as you know, you can go on, say, GoFundMe and look for what is it that interests me, or if I want to help families, or I agree. So I agree with that. I've never referred to it that way, but I like that.
And then another thing, I don't think I've ever really looked at Leviticus 19 like, a continuation of the 10 words, and I really liked it.
Yeah.
I live with teenagers, so sometimes I have to talk Gen Z,
Yep.
So when one of them will ask me, well, what do you believe? Well, I'd say, well, I believe in keeping the Sabbath and I believe in not being a giant a-hole.
Yeah.
So, and they're like, oh, okay, we can relate to that.
Yep.
And, the don't do something you hate to somebody else. I can see that applying to all kinds of religions. Many religions, what they do is and I'm not talking about the main three, I'm talking about all of them.
Yeah.
They'll concentrate their endeavors sometimes on manipulating people against their will.
Mm-hmm.
And is that really something you want somebody to do to you?
Right.
So that's kind of how I've been trying to look at it as well.
And is it also, I think about, orthodoxy, is it orthodoxy and orthopraxy, where, a lot of times people have the right theology in their head, maybe, they really proclaim that, my faith is, here's what I believe. I think this class, what I was feeling as I was putting the notes from pen to paper is how do we take our faith and put feet on it, put hands on it. And you listed a very good example just now with, if someone posts, I lost my family member and we can't afford this or whatever. We've all been in situations where we needed help. And I think it's our job, if I may, we should want, in other words, it shouldn't have to be dictated, because that's what a government has to do, because quite honestly, I think people of faith haven't stepped up. You think about when you understand things like the Amish, how many of us have in our mind somebody's barn needs rebuilt and the whole community shows up, and well, that's wonderful, but if you don't have people showing up, how do you bring that about? So somehow individuals like us have to find ways, I think, to find a way to practice the things that we believe, like your kids, Karen, who say, well, what do you believe? Well, let's go do this together. And I know you and your kids do a lot of things together, but sometimes it helps us to show in our actions, and those are some good ways. Other people might have examples too.
And that's it.
Good stuff. Thanks, Karen. Hey, Sue, how are you? Welcome. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you. I just wanted to tell you that this lesson today, as soon as I realized where you were going with it, I had a nonstop grin on my face. It was just so, I hadn't noticed the sign-offs. I love the way you've created that term. I hadn't realized that those sign-offs correlated to the Moses scroll. And when you pointed that out, it just thrilled my heart. And because I cherish the Moses scroll and read it constantly. And I just was so thrilled when you pointed out that indication of the presence of the Moses scroll in Leviticus. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Sue. And now I have to, maybe I need this disclaimer out there. Not everyone would agree with my understanding of what I presented today, particularly in terms of the Moses scroll and our sign-offs. But it is quite interesting. And there was an article, I just cannot remember where I read it. Maybe some of you might know. A lot of times we share articles back and forth. I see Dr. Tabor and others on. But someone, I think, sent me, I don't remember if it was on Torah.com or what, that pointed out in Leviticus 19 that certain of the commands have God's signature and certain ones don't.
Yeah.
And the ones that didn't in this person's article, he pointed out that, hey, look, notice that the sacrifices. And then when I really looked at it, I said, wow, now that's strange. But it certainly is worth taking a look at. So
I thought it was very interesting and very encouraging. And I'm so grateful that you pointed it out.
hey, thanks for your friendship and your comments. And I'm like you, I'm kind of hooked on this Moses scroll idea.
Thank you.
Good deal. Hey, Julia, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly well.
Okay. I think what I wanted to say is, I heard one of the things that Betty said when she said obedience, and for me, it's like when you're a parent and have a small child, and you tell them certain rules, and you tell them the rules before they understand why the rules are important.
Yeah.
You just get them to a place where they obey them. As they get older, they find out, oh, that's why you don't walk against the light. That's why you don't talk to strangers. And it's like, God is so wonderfully and simply complex. He gave us these, and I think part of it is because he knew there would come a time where maybe people wouldn't understand, but say, okay, I'm going to obey. But then some people, the light bulb comes on and goes, oh, that's why we're supposed to do this. Maybe there are instances where a situation happens, and if it happens to someone that they can be more empathetic to, or something that they understand, they go, that's why I should give. Now I understand.
Yeah.
And if you start with that, and then you understand, number one, that God is righteous, and that he knows things that you may not know.
Yeah.
And so if you start with that obedience and your understanding comes later, it's like God says, yeah, now you understand that point. But I already knew the point and knew that you didn't know, but would come to understand it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that this is some of the stuff why he has some of these things. Do you understand how many things? I mean, you said it would be wonderful if people just truly took into account, love your neighbor as yourself, and then went back before and understood what it means not to be vengeful and not to hold a grudge.
Yeah.
You know, we have differences now that have come up, and it seems now when people are talking, they get so violent and so angry instead of having civil discussions about differences.
Yeah. No, I agree.
Part of it, if it came to obedience, it's like, listen, let's just discuss this without that.
Mm-hmm.
It would be better. That's all. And yeah, your class was wonderful. It was wonderful.
Well, thanks for joining us, and thanks for those comments. Yeah, I think if we could ever, a lot of times as a young parent, I remember if someone, if a kid said, "Hey, why?" Because I said so. A lot of times we tend to fall back on that, to a position of authority. Do this because I said. And a lot of times we don't take the time to explain what's the benefit. That's one of the things I love about the biblical, the Moses scroll in particular, is do this. There is a I said so element, but it provides a blessing for obedience and a curse for disobedience. So I love the fact that you're not to have idols, you're not to make idols, you're not to bow down and worship. And you go, well, why? Well, because you're blessed is the person who loves God and
Yeah.
whose only God is God. It's like, well,
Yeah.
there's a blessing. It's like, why don't you cheat on your spouse? Well, there are a lot of reasons. There are a lot of
Yeah,
reasons, but
that's one
what's
of
the
the
blessing and the
things.
curse?
That's one of the things I love that Rabbi Tovia Singer would say. It was like it's like you're cheating.
Yeah.
It's like it's like idolatry is cheating. He's like, how could you say and pledge yourself here and then go, like he says, and look up your ex on Facebook or something?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Good stuff,
Okay.
Julia. Thank you. Hey, Eric and Caleb. How are you? How are you and the animals at Eric Nagel household? I know they're around there, probably cuddled up.
All three of them are curled up separately,
All right,
snoozing.
all right. It's Shabbat. What do you expect? How you doing, Eric?
That's right. I'm excellent, especially with this beautiful reprieve in our heat.
Yes.
The thought came to my mind about loving your neighbor and perhaps correcting or chastising or whatever. And then people are also talking about loving your enemy. And I was thinking, if the only thing you can do is be a light, that might qualify in loving them if you're giving them the example of how you should be, as opposed to getting in their face and
Yeah.
correcting them with the rod. Show them the way.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the only way I can do these folks who are either rooted in their religion or don't have any. I can still love them,
Yeah.
and I can be with them, and I can hug them and encourage them. And most people who know me pretty much know what I'm all about. So
Right.
try not to be shy about that.
No, and it helps. And let me ask you something. I kind of like where you're going, and I don't want to deviate from your point, but if you look at Leviticus 19, 17, and 18 together as a unit, which they seem to be in the text, you have different, it's almost on a gradient. Don't hate your brother in your heart is the way it begins. Right. And then it graduates up to you shall love your neighbor as yourself. So it's almost as if you said, you may not love your neighbor as yourself, but don't hate your brother. Maybe, and this is almost a question, could it be that describes a process, that we begin with this point and we work our way until you love the neighbor as yourself. And of course, other people have pointed out a lot of folks don't even love themselves. So how could they possibly interpret that properly? Maybe they've had trauma in their life. Maybe they are depressed greatly. So if we think about the broad spectrum of humanity, how do we bring this about? Well, it might be that we look at one aspect of that command or another. I don't know if that made sense. It made sense in my head. I don't know if it came out of my mouth the right way.
And it, to me, it has to be, you have to believe, trust in Yehovah first before anything. And if you can't do that, you can't love yourself.
Yeah.
Not the way he means to say it.
Mm-hmm.
And thus, in the third step, you can't love your neighbor if you don't love him and yourself.
Yep.
You have to understand what that is. And love in America and maybe most of the world is now considered an emotion.
Yeah.
That's the furthest thing from truth that anyone has ever come up with. It is not Hollywood. It is not an emotion.
What's love
It
got
is
to do?
action. It is action. It's a verb.
Yeah.
You've got to consider them more important than yourself before you have any sense of what's going. It's like loving your child and want to step in front of the car to protect it.
Yeah.
You have to, that's love.
That's some good stuff. Yeah, I think that if, when people said years ago, well, it really comes down to love God, love your neighbor. We tend to want to jump in and say, yeah, but I mean, you also have to do this, and this. And all of those things may be true, but I'm again reminded of, some of my love for these New Testament texts I grew up with. It's like, don't neglect all the details of the law, but certainly don't neglect the weightier matters. What are those weightier matters when we think about it? And I think the root of what we're getting at in this conversation, all of you and your points, is what does it really go back to? What's the basis? What are the weightier matters of the instructions, if you will? So.
Yeah, and I think that your lesson today and the lesson that I've learned from Moses' scroll and Deuteronomy and also reading the rest of Scripture is you love him and you love your neighbor, meaning you love yourself in the middle of all of that. You got the whole shebang, as we say.
That's it. Hey, good stuff, Eric.
Thank you.
And I'm working on the new building, so I have yet to talk to the electrician, but I'm going to try to get a plug just for you so that you can come visit us on Shabbat from time to time.
No. Put it in so everybody, including those with Teslas and all those expensive cars, can park there and
I can charge
bless
them.
us with the extra charge. Yes.
All right. Okay. Well, that might be the way to do it. Hey, thanks, Eric. Hey, JJ, how are you, my friend? Good to see you again. Wait, sorry. You got to unmute. There we go.
Got a double unmute. I was having audio problems, so I had to call in this morning.
Oh, okay.
I was throughout the course of the thing. This is another just great lesson. One more version of the 10 words. I have this. Well, you can't see it. I was studying this. I have a diary that I was using that kind of follows along the Torah portions with the parashot for each day of the calendar, and I was doing that for a couple years. And so I pulled out last year's at the beginning of this conversation. I just wrote in and I said, seems like the 10 words are being introduced here in 19, and because I just felt like every time I read it, they like said Exodus 20 or Deuteronomy 5 or wherever everyone goes to for the 10 words, and I was like, this is like an explanation for it all. How it ends in, I am, Yahovah, or I am Elohim, your Elohim. I just thought it was great. I just wanted to share that, and I do think it's peculiar that this is the one that kind of breaks it out like that. That is similar to the Shapiro Scrolls, and which is just a little bit different. I think in here there was like 19 times or so that it says, "I am your Elohim." I just wanted to share that.
No, good points, and I'm glad to hear that you noticed that as well. I've been around you just enough to know that you're a detail-oriented student like I am, I think, and so whenever we read these things, I've heard other people say this, but Jono used a phrase. We did a series sometime back where we worked through the 10 words according to various versions, and we did the Samaritan, the Septuagint, the canonical Exodus, Deuteronomy, Shapira, Nash Papyrus. I don't know what all, but we went through word by word. And one of the things that Jono often says is that these are various attempts to recall the 10 words that were spoken at Horeb. Now that's not very comforting to people of, like dogmatic faith. Like, I want to know, years ago, someone would say, do we have a copy of the 10 Commandments? You say, absolutely. Exodus chapter 20, Deuteronomy chapter 5, and that. But as we begin to really take a look at what do we have, I'm now really interested in what all do we have? What are those sources? As a historian, as someone who really wants to get back at the original or the authentic, or however you want to put that, I want to look at all these ancient forms and see. And what we see is that there's actually a lot of overlap. I mean, really, if you back up and you look at all of the versions I just listed, it's pretty close. We can nitpick over, well, this word has this and this is a slightly different wording, but it's pretty much firm. If we would follow this Decalogue faith, I think we really could turn the world upside down in a good way, shake it up and start living right. So good stuff. I appreciate you, JJ. Hey, Carolyn from France. How are you, my friend?
Great, Ross. Thank you so much for today's lesson. I'm amazed that I've never realized what was in Leviticus 19. The fact that the sacrifices mentioned there don't have God signing off on it makes me want to get out my black marker and redact every command I see from Genesis through Deuteronomy that doesn't end with, I am Elohim, your Elohim, or I am the Lord your God. The amount of text I would have left would be practically, statistically insignificant, which doesn't scare me, but I'm sure scares the pants off of anybody else.
You're scaring the pants off of me right now. No, I'm joking. No, I hear what you're saying, and I understand. I love the biblical text so much that when you said black marker, that was the main thing that made me nervous. But one thing that I have done, though, is I, too, make notes in my Bible. And I know that a lot of people who've been around me for a while have maybe picked up one of my Bibles and looked. And what I do is I will write notes now as I get older and hopefully a little wiser. And if you look behind me, there are quite a few different Bibles. And so what I've done is I use pencil a lot more now than I used to. I used to use a pen, but I will put a note and maybe a question mark and say not signed off, question mark. So there are ways to look at this, but I think your approach in what you're doing, what you're saying, what you're professing is you want to know what is the earliest form, what's the ancient message, And I think that's what we're all doing. I get phone calls, emails, text messages, Facebook messages that say, okay, if, for instance, the sacrificial cult is a later priestly addition, how do we know what's authentic? And that's the question, isn't it? I mean, that's what the biggest question that we all have.
I agree. But again, if the additions are additions and God's not the one that added them, then
I get
we
it.
have to get off the surfboard and start swimming.
Yeah.
I mean, it's scary.
It is.
It's scary.
It's scary, but it's also exciting. I mentioned this the other day. I saw a meme on Facebook, and a little bitty kid, probably 3 years old, is at the top of a very, very high slide, and he's got his arms crossed. I don't know if you can see my little picture. He's like he's scared, and the caption said something to the effect that when you know God's in control, but it's still going to be scary, it's like this kid's about to go down this high slide. That's kind of the way we feel sometimes. It's you want to do it. You want to, it's going to tickle, it's going to be fun, but at the same time, it's a little bit scary. So
I agree. So thank you for being the leader at the top of the slide.
Well, I don't know about that. I might be at the bottom saying, hey, I just went down it. I can tell you what it felt like for me. Please join me. But I do appreciate the fact that we're all brothers and sisters in this. We're all working together, and we're asking questions that a lot of people are a little bit scared to ask, if we're honest. And, we have to be there for each other, and that's one of the reasons that Seth is really encouraged us to use the discussions like on Horeb, because we want people to get in and ask questions. It's a safe place where they can really kind of discuss things that maybe they couldn't do anywhere else in their church or their synagogue or maybe among their family members. I have a lot of kids and grandkids, and there have been times in my walk that I just kept very quiet because I was concerned if I'm not right, if I'm wrong, I don't want to lead anybody down the path that I'm on. So that's why usually when I teach, I try to present things and say, look, this is the way I see it. And I'm just happy that some of you are there to listen and challenge. And that goes to Leviticus 19:17. When you see or hear me say things that you don't agree with, please reprove your brother, right? Let me know. Here's what you think. Brother Charles.
Hello.
Hey, Charles. How are you?
Oh, pretty good. I feel kind of like I used to feel kind of like Carolyn was talking about it. I want to take a pair of scissors or a magic marker, and that can't be right, and cut out entire books and stuff. But it's easier now. I actually picked this up from you, Ross. I use a highlighter now, and so if I come across a sign off, that's a good one to highlight with the green.
All
I
right.
have multiple highlighter colors.
All right.
That helped me.
Well,
That's all I had. Y'all have a great day. Love yous.
hey, man, love you too. Look, before I let Dr. Tabor take the mic, I want to say one thing. Think of I heard a parable one time about a garden, and in this garden, there is a crop that's planted, and then overnight, some bad person came through and filled the garden with seeds of thorns and so forth, and they grow up among the good fruit, and the question is, do I go out there and cut all those bad, thorns and thistles out? What if we let them grow together, maybe indicate with a light pencil color or something what we think are the weeds? In the end of days, I think all of those weeds will be gathered up. You don't want to pull them up now and accidentally pull up something else that you're not supposed to. Dr. James Tabor. Oh, go ahead, Charles. I'm sorry.
I might go out in the garden and cut the head off of the cut the blooms off of what I know is bad. But never mind.
I hear you.
I'm too easily distracted. I'm gonna shut up.
Dr. Tabor, welcome. How you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great, Ross. Thanks. Let me get my hand down here. Just a couple of related comments. We said this different times before, so some of you may have heard me say it, but think of the things that Abraham didn't have. And I'm thinking particularly of this is a Jewish Bible here, the Tanakh. He didn't have a Tanakh. There were, of course, traditions and so forth that we see in Genesis. But in terms of just thinking about the Bible, there's a kind of thing that can become idolatrous almost with the Bible itself, making that the focus rather than God. But one perception that is interesting, I'm going to use the Apostle Paul because he says it well, but it's in Judaism all over at the time. Second Temple Judaism, Hillel and others say it. And that is that, I'll just read you what he says, it's Romans 2, that circumcision, and understand that as, in his day, being a Jew, as being part of the covenant people. So circumcision is of value if you obey the Torah. But if you break the Torah, your circumcision becomes uncircumcision. It's like, well, you're not a member of the people of Israel. In a way, you are ethnically or whatever, but you're not. And then he goes on to say, and this is what I wanted to emphasize. So if a person who is uncircumcised, again, understand that as not part of the covenant, not part of what we call today maybe Judaism or the Israelite faith. So someone who is not keeps the precepts of the Torah, will not his, and again it says uncircumcision, but will not his non-Israelite status become an Israelite status? And then he goes on to say, those who are physically uncircumcised but keep the Torah. Now notice, according to Moses, physically circumcised, you need to circumcise your heart. So we're playing around with the notion of the sign of the covenant, the male sign of circumcision. So I'll just read it as it is. Those who are physically uncircumcised but keep the Torah will condemn those who have the written code. Now that would be, a Bible or the book of Deuteronomy or the Torah, in this case, probably the Torah, because they show that the law is written in the heart. And I think we talk about this a lot, but there are specifics in the 10 words, but most of the things that you read today in the Holiness Code, they're stated very well, but as soon as you hear them, they have what we would call a kind of ring of moral truth within our hearts. Like what Karen said, take care of the poor. You do it. You volunteer to do it.
Yeah.
Immediately it's like, you didn't think, oh, I would never want to do that. It appeals to you. Don't trip a blind person.
Yeah.
That's always my favorite. When we used to hang around with rabbis, they would talk about the 7 laws of Noah. And I remember asking once in a huge assembly of Betty was there, I think it was over 300 or 400 people, this conference in Fort Worth. And all these famous rabbis were there, and they were talking about the 7 laws of Noah, that's for the Gentiles and so forth. So I just raised my hand and stood up in front of everybody like a fool. And I said, well, there are a lot of precepts that are not part of the 7, unless you try to extend them some way in principle, which I think you would do. And I mentioned tripping the blind, which then leads to our whole concept of someone who is challenged in any way, mentally, physically, right?
Yeah.
You wouldn't take advantage of that. So there's this whole principle. But that's literally written in the heart. So the thing that's written in the heart is essentially the so-called golden rule, positive or negative.
Yeah.
Notice it's an appeal to the heart. It doesn't say go look up in your Bible and see if you find anything about tripping the blind or cursing the deaf.
Yeah.
Let's say that wasn't there. I guess I could do it then. I mean, it doesn't say not to.
Right.
But a simple idea, love your fellow person, your fellow human being, as yourself, implies that you already have the essentials of the Torah within you. Everyone does. And you just have to ask yourself, how would you want to be treated? And so, who's the author, Betty, that wrote the book, Everything You Need to Know You Learned in Kindergarten or something like that?
Yeah.
Think of a first grade teacher, a kindergarten teacher, a Head Start teacher, which Betty used to do that. And you go, hey, children, if everyone in the class was just like you, what kind of class would this be? And so forth. What are you appealing to there?
Mm-hmm.
And what do we say to our children as they just begin? Would you want Johnny to take your toy and break it and have 2 and 3 and you have none, right? So what are we appealing to?
Yep.
So I think so much of the heart of the Torah is stipulated in these categories, and it's very helpful to study and meditate on. You know, in the Torah, you meditate day and night, but Torah means the teaching, and the teaching's in your heart. So when Ross said today, I thought it was very good. Don't lie or don't bear false witness. Are you robbing the person of truth if you tell them a lie? You know, I hadn't actually thought of it just like that. So now I'm meditating on that, you know, like what's the extent of stealing? Reputation. I mean, hundreds of things, right? Well, how would you know? It can't all be stipulated. So we all have this, I guess you could call it a moral ring of truth, you know, like ding. You go, yeah, I know that's right. And you also know when you do wrong. We all know that, I think. Now, you can get into situational ethics and say, well, would you in any circumstance ever steal?
Yeah.
Well, I hope that you would in certain circumstances. Well, how would you decide then? It says don't steal. How would you possibly decide? As Moses said, it's written in your heart. Put it in your heart. It's simply a mirror reflecting the things that are in us. And I think that helps even in these more difficult questions where you're reading through pages of Leviticus, not the Holiness Code, but maybe other sections about the sacrificial system or anything along those lines that is not really part of a moral code, but does have to do with certain temporal rituals and certain practices at certain times by certain groups and so forth. But when you read Deuteronomy 5 or even just go with the Moses scroll, it's very much, as we say, a matter of the heart.
Yeah.
I saw in the chat, Ronnie had said to everyone, what about people who don't know Yehovah? Well, if you know what Yehovah means, there are no people who don't know the force of all forces or the one who is and was and is to come. Now, they might not know it in any detail in terms of the history of salvation, as we call it. Like, well, they wouldn't know about Abraham and they wouldn't know about the 10 words and Moses, but it's fairly universal, I think, with human beings to wonder and to seek and ask what life is all about and so forth. And if people get away from religion and sit and meditate really about it, so many things would come to you as a natural person. And it seems like that's what the new covenant is all about, you know, to write it in the heart so that they would all know me from the least to the greatest. And you hear a word behind you saying, this is the way.
Yeah.
So I have moral dilemmas. We all do. Sometimes we're not sure what the right course would be. But usually if you meditate a little bit and pray, you know, kind of offer up your sense, you'll get a direction. A lot of times it's just wisdom on acting in a complex situation. It's not a matter of right or wrong necessarily, but what would be the best way to handle this situation that's complex, particularly our children or grandchildren or whatever. It's not always easy to say, well, you do this, you know. Sometimes you have to think what you do. So I love the Bible as much as Ross does. I don't always carry it to the supermarket with me as he does, but you know, it's my meditation day and night. I stroke it. This Bible that I've had for all these years. Yeah, so I love it. I love it all. And Ernest Martin used to say, I don't know if you know Ernest Martin, he was a friend of mine, a great scholar. He said, James, I just love the Bible. All of it, even the mistakes. And he was talking about the different manuscripts. He said, I even love that. And Ross has been telling me that lately, like he's comparing the Masoretic texts. You say, oh, well, that's a single text. No, it isn't.
Yeah.
We've talked about that. but I actually I find it interesting to know any of the changes or any of the alternatives like that we find in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And I don't think any of them are threatening to any of us in terms of, well, I don't know what to do now about helping the poor, because there was this variant reading in Isaiah and it didn't mention what I thought it did. Well, you'll be okay. I
Hey,
think.
James, let me say
Yeah.
while you're up there, while listening to you talk, James and I talk several times a week generally. I mean, unless we're both just swamped, but we do communicate a lot. And one idea that's come up between us, what if we had a book, and in that book you had sort of the best of the Hebrew Bible, and then you also in the same book had the best of the Christian New Testament. Now, some of you know that Thomas Jefferson and others have sort of edited their version of the Bible. Now, we all do this. We don't admit it, but we all do this. There are things that we read in the biblical text that, now I love the whole Bible, just like James said, this is my Bible. But I'm not talking about a Bible. What if you had a book that covered some of the Moses's greatest hits? And it just turned out, so James would be the editor of the New Testament part. I'd be maybe the editor of the Hebrew Bible. I think that this would really be a powerful, people would pick it up, and in a way, it kind of goes to what Carolyn says. It's like you would pull out from it the greatest. And one of our verses that James and I talk about a lot is from Jeremiah 15. Now, Jeremiah has seen the real scroll. We know he has seen the real scroll. And one of the things that he says is he goes to God. In fact, I'm going to read that. Jeremiah 15.
And read a literal translation too, because we've talked about that.
Yeah, Jeremiah 15, and I'll jump back to the Hebrew, I think, as we need. But just a few verses. Let's see. It is okay. Let's see. Okay. O Lord, remember me and visit me and bring down retribution from me on my persecutors. In your forbearance, don't take me away. Know that on your account I suffer insult. Your words were found and I ate them. I think he saw the real scroll and devoured it. And your words became to me a joy and the delight of my heart, for I am called by your name. O Lord God of hosts, I did not sit in the company of merrymakers, nor did I rejoice under the weight of your hand. I sat alone, for you had filled me with indignation. Why is my pain unceasing, my wound incurable, refusing to be healed? Truly you are to me like a deceitful brook, like waters that fail. He's saying to God, he's being very open. I came to you for a drink of fresh water, and it's a mirage. I'm alone. Here's what God tells him. If you turn back, I'll take you back, and you shall stand before me. If you utter what is precious and not what is worthless, you shall serve as my mouth. It is they who will turn to you, not you who will turn to them. In that passage, it's to draw forth, literally it means to draw forth the precious from that which is worthless. Is that the way we translate it, James? It's this idea that you're pulling,
even the word Exodus, to bring out, to bring out the treasure. It's the word treasure.
So that's, wouldn't that be something if we could pull from that which has been tampered with? And I'm not saying anything that Jeremiah didn't say. I mean, we know that scribes altered some of these things. So what would we do? We would be drawing out the precious, the rare. The word yakar means rare, precious, drawing that from stuff that wasn't quite as precious, if you will. Anyway, just an idea. It just struck me listening to, James quoting from, and I quoted from the New Testament. Look, there are some fantastic Second Temple Jewish teachings that are evidenced in the New Testament as its earliest source. much earlier than later Jewish literature, I might add. So I don't know. I think
And
this is
also
interesting.
in the other body of material we have from that early period is in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And if you read, I would recommend particularly the teacher's hymns. It's called the Thanksgiving hymns. Those are deep spiritual meditations of a very sensitive spiritual soul. We think the teacher
Yeah.
wrote the middle part, and it's as deep as anything you've ever read. And it's clearly from an individual that has just steeped himself in God's word and what God really wants, and, a lot about the heart and so forth. And in the community rule at the end, there's this beautiful prayer that starts out, "Before I move my hands and feet, O Lord, I praise you." And so
Yeah.
you picture somebody in bed. And I know many of you do this. I try to do this as you wake up, just to lie there a bit. And I just love the way it says, "Before I move my hands and feet."
Yeah.
You begin to think about the Shema.
Mm-hmm.
When you rise up and when you lie down and when you walk along the way. And that's what you're getting ready to do. So these words shall be upon your heart. So these are not things that I'm suggesting or Ross is suggesting that are somehow alien. They're actually at the very core of these great passages. And of course, Deuteronomy, what does the Lord require of you? I think it's Deuteronomy 12, right? And all of those kind of passages, Jeremiah,
Yeah.
to Isaiah, "To this person I will look." Those are those ringing passages that inspire us so much. And that's not to take away from the judgment and some of the unpleasant things.
Sure.
We should certainly be aware of those as well, because there are consequences for people's behavior that are pretty ugly to think about, but also to be kind of lifted up and inspired. So
Good thoughts.
it's in your heart. It's not very far from you. Remember?
Yep.
You don't have to go to heaven to get it. You don't have to go down to Sheol and get it. You don't have to go to the wizards that peep and mutter. Remember Isaiah 8?
Yeah. Beautiful stuff. Look, we've got a couple more. I see Miriam's hand is up. Hey, Miriam, my sister, how are you? I'm waiting on you to unmute. Hopefully that's all it takes. Okay. All right, Ronnie, let's get you and we'll come back to Miriam. Hey, Ronnie, how are you, my brother?
Hey, can you hear me?
I can. I hear you perfectly
Okay,
well.
great. Just a couple of questions. Like one thing came up earlier about, somebody mentioned why people are so angry. And I think one thing is their priorities, because this group here has priorities where some people don't have that, even in Christianity. I mean, like they have their priorities, we have our priorities, etc. But a lot of people I see out there, their anger is based upon a lot of things they don't have per se, a lot of like the joy on the inside,
Yeah.
this nature, and of course they're angry. They've been fed a lot of stuff and they don't know what to do or whatever. But the other thing is, I want to say, Ross, I appreciate too what you're trying to do. You're presenting both sides of the story a lot of times, and then we have to take that and put it in, in ways we can use it, because like I mentioned earlier in one of the texts, this learning to be holy and being holy, I think it's a time process.
Yeah.
I don't think it happens instantaneously, like, some people think automatically this is just what happens. Because like I had to learn to change my lifestyle based upon what the text says and what I know what it says, at this point in time.
Yeah.
So it's a time evolution. I wish I'd known it 30 years ago, like what I know today.
Yeah.
I think I'm a lot further on.
Ronnie, let me ask you this, because we've been friends for, man, We've been friends since we were
Don't
kids
say that
almost.
long.
But one thing that I think about is one thing I think we both have come to grapple with and ultimately to realize this faith thing, as Eric would refer to as emunah, it's a walk, it's a journey. You don't arrive like I do not. I never, if I ever say anything that sounds like this, please somebody call me and chew me out. But sometimes I'll hear people say, well, I used to believe that, but once you get to where I'm at, once you get up here, that, it's so condescending. Sometimes people, I don't know how much further I am than anybody else, and I don't care. All I know is that since I've been exposed to this book that I love, and I'm talking my whole life, I have tried to take in bits and pieces of it and model it and learn to live it. Some of that is possible, some of it's impossible, and some of it, quite honestly, I just don't believe anymore. But along the way, I've made promises to be honest with people, to be honest with Moses, honest with God, and I've come to appreciate that faith is a journey. It's not, and here's the real troubling part for people. You know how many times, and Ronnie, we talked about this week because you had heard from people and I've heard from people. People say this, Ross, I don't know where you're going with this. I don't know where Ross is going with this, but I don't know that I like it. Well, let me tell you where Ross is going. Ross is going where the texts lead and where God leads. And I'm trying my best to be honest and struggle, but I'm being honest as I find things. I'm letting people know. Some people would prefer that I not say if I see something, I thought it was funny. I'm interrupting myself. Someone asked a question about Elijah. And I wrote in the YouTube video comment, I answered that and I said, have patience. I know it's been a while, but Seth and I, amongst our other duties, are working on a series on the Northern Prophets that I promise, I didn't say all this, this is my paraphrase, but I said, I promise I'll answer that question. And the answer made me laugh out loud. They said, please don't. Like, please don't get into the Elijah question. I don't want you to take anything else from me. That's what I took that they meant. But I don't want to be that person. But what I do want to do is say, let's take these texts that we love. Let's recognize that the story where God called Abram to leave his father's house and everything that he was familiar with, God tells Abram in that story, according to the writer, go to a place that I'll show you. Meaning, you don't know where you're going yet. So when people say, I don't know where Ross is going yet, I'm going to a place I want to say that God is showing me and that God is showing you. And that's the journey. It's the journey of faith. We don't know what the end is. And you know what? I no longer feel like I have to. Years ago, when I would go to a church and I'd move to another church, I'd say, let me see your articles of faith. I wanted to see, what do you believe about this, and the other? And then sometimes I'd say, I don't agree with point 4. I can't go here. I don't have one of those anymore. I have set out to follow the path. Ronnie, I didn't mean to hijack you, man. I was thinking, yeah.
I just got a couple of points,
Yep.
For me, my whole life has been a journey, and all of it, no matter where I was, has increased my faith one way or another. Even going through Christianity,
Yep.
I learned a lot of stuff. I built a lot of foundation there. Some I had to change.
Yep.
Okay. But I think that's what we've all done, because we've all come through a lot of the same situations. But as we become more aware of what is truth, we have to take that and utilize it. Either, be honest with you, there's sometimes, Ross, I accept things and then sometimes I don't, because it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
But in time, as my knowledge increases, and I don't consider myself above or below anybody else. I'm where Ronnie is.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm happy there. You know, do I want more? Yes, I want more. But I found with God, it's a process. You know, it doesn't come overnight all the time. you
Yeah.
know. That's all I got to say. But
Hey,
thank
that's
you.
some good stuff, Ronnie. I appreciate you, man. It's
All
good
right,
to
man.
have people around you that have been doing this for a while, because I might have to call Ronnie from time to time, or he calls me, but that's what we're here for. All right, Miriam, let's try it again. Let's see if we can get you unmuted so you can fill us in on something. I see your hand up. I see you're unmuted. Go ahead and try, Miriam. Let's see if I can hear you.
Shabbat Shalom.
I got you. I hear you. Go ahead, my sister.
Great. Okay. This is the topic to me of love. Love, love, love. We need to learn love. Okay. And love your neighbor, love your brother, love everybody. But what about those that don't have that exposure to love, that don't have a faith imunah, that don't have connection to religious beliefs? How are they going to connect?
Great question.
Forgive this love. Yes.
Great question. I'm gonna throw an idea at you, and you tell me what you think. I think that by us demonstrating this love, this unconditional love, as best we can in our with all our human frailties and so forth, faults and frailties, I think what happens, and this is really in the book of Deuteronomy, it basically says that through our actions, through living our life according to these principles, what that's going to do is it's going to cause people to say, what a wise and understanding people this is. I want to, they're going to say, Miriam, what is it? Why are you always so loving? Why are you so happy all the time? And you can say, look, it has to do with my belief. It has to do with my faith. And, but I think sometimes it's that simple, because in our world today, sometimes it's the simplicity of our act of kindness that causes people to respond in like ways to others. I give you an example. I don't know if it's true. I saw a video somebody forwarded me the other day. It was a short video, and the guy was talking about a person who was at the end of his rope, as we say in life. He didn't know if he could go on, and he was going to end his own life. And he wrote in a note that if anybody on my way to where he was going to do this, if anyone will simply smile at me, just smile, I won't go through with it. And the person ultimately ended his own life. They found the note later. I know it's a harsh story, and it's cruel, and it's kind of shocking. But what if somehow, some way, just our acts of kindness, or the way that we treat other people at the grocery store, at Walmart, at the hardware store, at the school function with our kids, I think sometimes it's that easy. I think that we reach people in ways to where they say, whatever it is that JJ has, I want. Whatever it is that Eric, what is it? I think that's what we have to do. And it may or may not work, but it certainly has a chance of working.
Amen. And my final point is, okay, we know Yahweh have this great love. It's called Hesed. A Hesed that just extends from the beginning of creation until the end of time, maybe. I'm not sure. But love, Hesed, forgiveness, kindness, mercy, it comes from Him.
Yeah.
Him alone. None other, ain't old.
No more.
His own. Yes.
Yep.
And so we have to make sure we realize where it's coming from and what it's about, but who it needs to reach. And those that are, unloving, unfaithful, no emunah, no faith, that's what I'm concerned about. How does this love get to those that are so in pain and in depth and extension away from God, they feel, and not close up to Him? I mean, we as faith, we feel that love, but it's so many that's in the depths and the trenches and below that we don't understand what they're feeling because it's so different from us, but it still penetrates. Yahweh, His Hesed, still wants to reach, and that's my point.
Well, your point is excellent, and I want to touch it one more time in Leviticus 19, 30. I think 33 and 34 is where he says, you know what it's like to be a stranger, so love the stranger. So what you're saying is exactly what underscores the holiness code. How do you teach it? How do you share it with people that don't have it? By doing that love to them. And that's the whole point. If what you just described is what the great rabbis always pointed out. So Miriam, your mind is doing the same thing they did, and that's this. How do you get this to the masses? And what they said was, we imitate God. Now, what does that mean? Well, you just kind of gave the question of how do we imitate God. Look at it this way. Genesis 1 begins with God, actually by Genesis 4, God clothes Adam and Eve. And at the end of the Torah, he buries Moses. So sometimes in the normal life cycle of things, we can communicate our love and care for those around us. And it might be bringing clothes to a clothes closet for the poor, the needy. They don't have to know it came from Ross or Miriam, but if we can give to where someone who is that downtrodden person can say, oh man, somebody cared enough to bring these nice clothes. Or if we can somehow bring maybe food to a food closet, or it's through acts of kindness. It's through unknown, especially when they don't know where it came from.
Amen.
Because then people don't give credit to Ross, they give credit to God. So I think that's what we ought to do is, and Karen brought this up too, when she opened up some of her thoughts. How do we give to these people who need? That's a big deal. It's a big deal. Hey, good questions, Miriam. Good points. Thanks for your comments.
And His Hesed is continuing every day, and and I make it a daily prayer with my Shema. Thank you for your Hesed, your great kindness, your mercy. We ought to thank Him every day for that.
That's right.
Yeah.
I'm with you. Thanks, Miriam. God bless you, my sister.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom. All right, Sue.
Thank you. With what Miriam is saying, we probably all have stories like this, but I have a prayer request. My sister had to give up her first child for adoption, and he found us about 10 years ago, and I was not aware of this, and it's only been in the last 2 years that I've been in contact with him. It turned out that he had a very unfortunate childhood. His adoptive mother died when he was very young, and his adoptive father was very abusive. So he's basically lived on the street since he was about 11 years old. And as a result, he's gotten into substance abuse and a lot of anger and all that. Well, his sister and I got in touch with him finally a couple of years ago, as I say, and we have just been accepting him, just loving him the way he is.
Yeah.
And when we first started talking with him, he didn't even believe in God at all, very dismissive, and not even angry at God. He really just didn't even believe in him.
Yeah.
And then, but now, 2 years later, after just being loved on from a distance, my niece lives, he lives in Illinois. My niece and I live in 2 other states. We don't even get to be physically with him. And yet just sharing our love with him over the phone, now he's turning to God.
Good.
And that, of course, that just thrills our hearts. So, but he is still struggling with substance abuse. So I just wanted to bring him to your attention. If you think of praying for him, his name is Craig. He's in his 60s. He's an unbelievably intelligent person. He's absolutely brilliant. But he's got a lot of issues to deal with, but he is turning to God, and Yehovah, praise your holy name.
Yes. No, and you kind of underscore what others have said in different situations. Think of it like this: we might be, and our actions might be, the only contact with God and his ways that certain people ever have. And if we think about that we might be the only Bible anyone ever reads, that's the way we ought to go through life, is to treat people the way we would want to be treated, and try to, as much as we can, love unconditionally. So I'll pray for Craig with you. I appreciate you sharing that. Eric, you have the last go. We are going to wrap this up, so I want to hear what you have to say, and I think let people go enjoy the rest of their weekend.
Amen. I was just going to say, I know a rabbi who, if you will, preaches that if you don't have a smile on your face all the time, you truly don't love him or know him as you should. And the quick story that came to mind was one of the lovely ladies who's a checkout person at the local grocery store, Roush's. He's always been a favorite of mine for some reason.
Yeah.
She's in the lane. I usually don't have a lot. I was standing in line and I just saw she was just grumpy looking, frown on her face. And so the first thing I did is, how's my favorite cashier of all time?
There you go.
And you know what she did? She smiled.
Yeah.
And now she smiles when she sees me coming.
Yep.
What else do you need to do? You don't need to preach at them. You don't need to tell them about salvation or anything else.
Yep.
Smile.
That's
Because
right.
that's our Father saying to that person, there is something that I have for you, my child.
True.
Think about
And we never know what other people are going through. We see people all the time in the store, along the way, and we just don't know. Maybe they're in a very, very tough time, and sometimes they might need a smile. I'm not always smiling. I mean, like all of you, we all have difficulties in life, and as we say, there has to be stormy days to make the plants grow. So we're going to have sadness. We're going to have happiness. But it helps. I think it helps us to help others, to give people hope, to give people encouragement, to be nice. Just be nice. Karen worded it, don't be an A, I mean, hey, sometimes it's that. But just if we can try to be good examples, ambassadors of the way, bring forward that holiness code in your everyday life. You can't go wrong by doing right. And I think that's the key. I really think that's the key.
To quote a friend of ours, be a spark.
Yeah, that's
All
right.
it takes is showing your teeth.
That's right.
Takes a lot less muscles to smile than it does to frown.
I hear you, brother. Look, all right. So tomorrow again is Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day for those who are rejoicing in the day, those who have lost a mother, lost a child, wanted children, couldn't have children. I know there are hundreds of reasons that it's not such a happy day, but I want everyone to do their best to think in the best of ways to have the best day. God bless you. We love you. See you next week, and Shabbat Shalom, Shavua Tov. Have a great rest of your day.